cycle, sharing insights and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. Right along here with Ransom Godwin tonight, 10 p.m. to midnight, Revolution Radio. Thank you for joining us. Also tonight on Independent Broadcast Network and freeworld.fm. Join us there as well. You know, Ransom and I talk about Neanderthals and Denisovans, and there's some new information out right now. Climate change impacted human population numbers in the Neolithic and Bronze Age. So obviously we're not alone. So if they're trying to still brainwash, or I should say indoctrinate, or move your mind into that you are the one causing all the problems, perhaps it's not, because if human populations in the Neolithic, which is quite some time back, in Bronze Age, then that means that it's a cycle of change. And you know what gets me is, I got to make sure I'm on here. There we are. Okay. I just got a signal that said no sound over there, so I'm wondering what I'm going to do here. Let's connect settings again. Speaker microphone output, I didn't have it on, no wonder. There we go. Now, you got to think about how they're telling us this. You're responsible for everything. Yet we have two instances here of climate change directly in front of us from prior times in our history. You know, I'd like to talk about this tonight as well. Everybody's focused on what's happening in the Middle East. You know, it's kind of a tidal wave of things happening, but Ransom, I got another headline for you here. Neanderthals carry genes acquired from ancient interactions with cousins of modern humans. They're talking going pre-400,000 years ago, pre-Homo sapiens sapien, and the Neanderthals were dancing in the horizontal bop with some other kind of either, I don't know, Australopithecus or something. But it seems like we've shrunken down as we move through time. But anyway, thanks for joining us tonight. Trying to keep it on a lighthearted, different type of message for the evening to start us off in case you need a break from the madness in the world.
And it is, we're coming up on Halloween, man. So, you know, the world's going to have a hollow time. No, you know, I read that exact, maybe not the exact article, but I've read several articles on that topic. And what's funny is because it's the beginning of the end of what everybody has learned as human history and anthropology. It's all falling apart. There are now apes in Europe, apes in Asia, which is something that, you know, me and many other people have said for a long time, that there probably is no single area or location that specifically humans came out of. Actually, it seems that many different types of humans, and we are saying humans in the term of conscious, upright walking, tool making, art making, most likely culture of some kind, humans. And so close to us that you're exactly right. They made it. And I read that thing, and really what they're saying is they're trying to put a little twist on there, even there, that's a little bit untrue. What that is proof of is actually modern humans already being in Europe, you know, hundreds of thousands of years before they say they got there, and intermixing with Neanderthal and probably Denisovan and some other humans. I mean, because, you know, we keep finding evidence for one type of human. They assume it's this one or that one, and they don't have the DNA to attach to it. You know, there's the so-called dragon man that they discovered in China, right? And it has this big old brow ridge on it, but other than that, looks very, human. Obviously, it's some kind of modern human, and they're wanting to place the Denisovan human on that, but there's no DNA to connect with it, at least yet. And they're finding, in the field of DNA, it's really throwing history on its head, because it really puts perspective on today's fake racial strife that's going on in the world. It's completely fake. It's been described to modern humans in a totally backwards way, where they describe, like, different humans or different races from different places. The truth is that we're Heinz 57 mutts of several different human species, and we're what's left over of several cataclysms that reduce the numbers of each one of those, and we just happen to be the admixture species that came out on the end. And it's a really touchy subject, because now they're getting real percentages on, how much Cro-Magnon, how much Neanderthal, how much ghost species, how much this, that, and the other thing. And what they're finding out is that there were many players in the human experience before, modern view of history and how we came about of Africa. So it seems like there's multiple sources for humans, and the out of Africa theory has kind of been debunked in a way, because it always insinuated that humans just kind of walked out of Africa and went all around the planet and mutated out into different people. And now we know that there were many, many, many back and forth trips between hominid species, humans of different kinds. And now they're testing different areas of the world. And we're finding out we're all these different percentages of ancient humans. And what does that mean for today? It seems like not much, other than they can specifically target genes of populations better or worse than they used to be able to. Or, if you're going to get into the idea of helping humanity more on the light side, it gives scientists a better understanding of why some people get sick from diseases and others don't, because there's different immunities and different, genetic histories that help with specific diseases from different things. And thank God, because a lot of the diseases, it seems like, would have killed out regular humans if we didn't have admixture DNA along with the population, and vice versa. It seems like the only reason that Neanderthal and some of the other ones are still around is because they had modern human DNA mixed and got to continue their genetic lines down until now. And it did put a big perspective. So what they're talking about is many, many trips back and forth over through the continents. And you got to keep in mind, in the prehistory, like the Neolithic times, the ocean was quite a bit lower than it is now, like at least 400 feet or more, which means there were these massive land areas exposed to humans of all different kinds all around the planet, and they were exploring. And their whole idea of how the world is settled is being thrown apart and torn apart, because it's mostly fantasy about, because, we're finding DNA in the American natives from South America to North America that proves there were trans-Pacific, migrations from different places. And there's artifacts all over North America that insinuates, there were many contacts with Europe or the Mediterranean over time. Maybe they were one-offs, but they were still happening, and which means that there was some idea of exchange of ideas. And then you can't ignore the fact that all cultures have this symbolic precession of the equinox measuring in different ways all around the world, which tells you, in my opinion at least, that the precession of the equinox has been marked in time for at least 52,000 years. And I just always say that because they always give mankind credit for the 26,000 years. But in order for you to see the entire cycle repeat and know that it's a repeating cycle, you have to have seen it twice. You couldn't have just seen it once and known that that's the pattern. You would have had to seen it twice, which puts in the idea that at least 52,000 years ago, there was an advanced enough culture that talked to other cultures that started marking the precession of the equinox and measuring time for later generations to know about. I mean, everything from planting your harvests to when to harvest them, all of that stuff is encoded in all these old megalithic sites. And we don't even know which human or group of humans actually built most of these things. We're taking for granted that over time demographics change in areas. There's migration, there's mixing, there's all of these different ideas. So every piece of land that someone's claiming on the earth is their ancestral homes. I hate to break it to you. More than likely, there were many, 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 many different groups of people over the last couple 100,000 years that were there first and laid claim first and lost it due to calamity and catastrophe and just the changing of, species into different forms. You can't really fathom the idea that there were so many different kind of humans, and when they came across each other, it was either trade or war. I mean, especially if you weren't had formulated vocal languages and the ability to communicate easily, there would have been a lot of misunderstandings. But we know even after all that, there was enough interspecies breeding that came up with this Homo sapiens sapien we call ourselves today. I was just reading a paper the other day, which surprised me. Because generally it was thought that Europeans carry more Neanderthal DNA and Asians had more Denisovan DNA, but it turns out Asians actually have a lot of Denisovan, and in areas like Japan and Korea have up to 10% Neanderthal DNA. And different areas in Europe, go up and down with the number of amounts of Neanderthal DNA. And then not only that, there's been obviously intercontinental genetic drift back and forth over time. I mean, we know that there were blondies out in the middle of China building pyramids or at least hanging out by them, thousands of years ago. And the same could be said in other places, and demographics change. So the idea that human beings in a modern time can claim lands thousands of years old, knowing that demographics and genetics slightly change over time, and ideas and all of the battles. Like, everybody's talking about the Middle East right now, and it's really interesting. This is something that goes so far back in time, people really just don't get it. They boil it down to a black and white. Which team are you on? But if you realize what's going on, this is part of everyone in the world's human history playing out just like it has been in the same area for thousands of years, literally. There's more modern examples. Like you could go back to what was the little crusader king there of Jerusalem that had the leprosy and he had to wear the mask all the time and all that stuff. And he actually beat Saladin in a battle, which gave control over the area to Christians. But he died, and then Saladin came back and took over the whole area. And what was weird about that is at the time they were usually killing everybody and making them move. But Saladin actually said, you know what? Well, it's kind of like an amnesty, and that's why there's been 3 Abrahamic religions right there in Judea or Israel or Palestinia, whichever name you want to use, because, there was the Roman name for it. They changed it from Judea and Israel a long time ago. But before that, it was the Canaanites, and before that, it was the Persians. I mean, we can go back into time, and if we're really going to be silly like that and start claiming lands, like it's the next goofy headline in the news going to be that England is going to take back Egypt because 90% of English men carry Tutankhamun's genetics. I mean, you know how silly that is. And they've pawned the whole planet into this team battle, tribalism. It even goes down to, the simple American drinker that wears a jersey with another man's name on it. And, everybody, they'll fight over ideas of 2 guys playing with balls on national TV, and people will get really serious over that. And it's a sport that they don't play. They don't have any money in the franchise, so they're not making money if they win or lose. And, it's so silly, but that's the level that modern humans are on. And when you compare that to what we think ancient peoples were, you can't really judge them. I mean, we're just as tribalistic and naive nowadays, and that's what you see playing out in the world in the form of World War III. because they're already calling it that, basically, even though the nukes haven't fly or nothing like that. And this may drag on for decades. I mean, you've seen the slow motion of the Cold War. We might be lucky enough to pull something off like that long enough to, have sane people maybe cycle back into the governments for a little while, hopefully.
Yeah, well, you're admitting a cycle once again on geomagnetic pole shift and the size of humans or other variants of that existed across this planet. You just described the classic myth of giant versus what we consider 6-foot human. Go back to the stories of David and Goliath for another one. The history is riddled with these, and you wonder why there were humans on, or I should say giants on this planet with humans at the same time. There's multi-species thing that has gone on. So the only thing that I could see that would really wipe out these other species would be a geomagnetic pole shift, or in combination with that, an electromagnetic shift on the sun, because you have to realize that, our body is mainly water molecules, and any type of electromagnetic disturbance to that charge going into that system, regardless of the electromagnetism on the hemispheres of the brain. But once you start interfering with molecular level water and the charged state of the water in the body, you're going to have a real serious problem. And a lot of times when the sun will do something significant, the vibrational frequency, even though we might not be able to hear it, the vibration coming out of that star changes. So, you look at this, and by confusing our history from the past and what was interbred with what, and was it 75,000 years ago? Was it 250,000 years ago? Was it predominantly, like you said, in Eurasia, where this crossbreeding of Neanderthal or Denisovan or something further back mixed with modern day Homo sapien sapien, and something popped out as like a human mutt? Or was it in Africa? Because the studies are showing that a lot of, they're puzzled by the sub-Saharan African populations not containing chunks of these DNA that resemble Neanderthals. So, like, where was this split? Yeah, they came out of Africa, and then it just stopped, and there was no There's so many quirky things to it. But by obfuscating our history, they're also obfuscating what I consider larger, more powerful cycles on the Ice Age cycle inside this. Because if you look at where we sit today in world global temperatures, we're some 10 degrees Celsius or more, probably closer to 12 to 13 degrees Celsius on average global temperature, warmer than it would be for those 90,000 years. But then again, when you're looking at our star stepping down its activity state, and the frequency and the energy coming off that star, and perhaps much larger individuals, creatures, or beings couldn't hold state for something that, again, you're coming down to I think you could look at DNA strands, et cetera, but I really think a lot of this is predicated just on something very simple, on the water molecules or the percentage of water in the human body and in the brain that's affected by the energetic state of our solar system when it changes with the sun, electromagnetics. So, you can look at this thing when they put different charge states onto plants and, experiment with growing and how they can get plants to grow larger in different magnetic fields. And then you can do atmospheric pressure changes. You can boost CO2. You can add music. You could do copper, and then, some types of, different type of gardening techniques using copper to bring a different magnetic state into the soil. There's a huge amount of changes that can be put on top. But if you strip all that away, and you just strip it away, you're talking about moisture and sunlight. Well, that whole change of frequency in water molecules, and they try to bring you back now. Where's that lineage that you spoke about, Ransom? Where does it really start? These modern humans. Okay, they migrated to Eurasia, but then there was somebody already there that was interbreeding with them, that interbred with the Neanderthals. Because if you take these stories further back, and there was a great book, it was called Us and Them, where it wasn't so much Neanderthal were like taller, gigantic beings that were slow and lerpy. They were super predators. but they were in the evenings, dark. And the whole thing was about how Neanderthals would hunt humans as a food source. So to say that they were just like coexisting and living together and interbreeding, and it's just like, a 12-foot giant wanted to hang out with a 5-foot woman, and this is the way things move forward in our lineage. Why are these stories of things that go bump in the night so prevalent in every culture around the planet? Lock the door. Get the villages together. Put out the torches and stand guard. What were they terrified of? It sure wasn't a pack of wolves. It was something much more. And the way that apparently humans would have to retreat up into trees or small openings into caves to try to escape these Neanderthal hunters. And that starts to make sense when you're thinking about all these nightmares and why they would try to scare children in the olden days with these, before bedtime things. Check under your bed. Don't go out at night by yourself. Little Red Riding Hood. This is just time immemorial. Nighttime is dangerous for humans. Plain and simple. And then you got to think, like you hit it on the head when you said, hey, there's blonde people running around over in China. But, at the same time, they found an enormous amount of redhead, anywhere from 6 to 7 foot tall, red-headed mummies in China as well, buried in some of those pyramids. Which, how does that make sense? If everything was so dissected and there was hardly anybody on the planet and there was 250 million people and they didn't intertrade and these sort of things, or were there? And we've come to these large numbers of people on the planet prior because, this 12,000 year cycle that Ben Davidson and Douglas Vogt talk about, in addition to Randall Carlson, they're all kind of touching on the same subjects here. Think about our modern day electronics. If we had a geomagnetic, not a geophysical, like just the crust of the planet's not going to slip, although it's possible if we go into a zero magnetic field where the sun steps down into a zero magnetic field, obviously our Earth's magnetic field would disappear at the same time. And the crust would kind of rotate over the mantle. And then when a field reestablishes itself, it would lock back in place depending on what polarity was. And that's maybe why we're tilted off and not exactly perpendicular with the ecliptic, that the stories of old talk about that. But I just want to keep it incredibly simple. These geomagnetic, where the North and the South Pole flip, if we do modern day electronics, none of it works. Nothing works. It all stops. Because it's predicated on a north-south orientation for any electronics to work. If that were to flip, everything would be non-functional. Now you have to wonder also, with species, what would happen to a Neanderthal or us as humans? It's the same thing as changing the atmospheric pressure, and perhaps you could affect the sunlight where you could take out the X-rays and you could take out the ultraviolet and you have sort of a diffused sunlight. There's a huge amount of factors. Who would survive during that? You flip the North and South poles, your brain is not going to function correctly. Now you got to think about the smaller little creatures would be able to hide and tuck into the rocks, tuck into the caves, get out of the way. But maybe some of those openings in the earth had a certain type of mineral around it that would protect their brains. And when they come out into a reoriented system, then they wouldn't have had the reorientation occur that would have fried their brains at the same time. The lobes would not intersect or communicate any longer. But perhaps they were in a capsule of mineral composition of the earth, so when they pop back out in the new field, they didn't go through the transition of the field. You would still be functional at that point. It's the ripping apart of the lobes and that discontinuity of electrical signaling between those two that would completely cease. And it's almost as if you would have a lobotomy over the entire brain. And when it reestablished itself with a new magnetic field, during that change, if you were involved with the entire change and not encapsulating some minerals or some type of protective coating, you would get scrambled, literally. But if you were inside a protective housing, and that could be any types of, maybe it was they ran into a granite cave and the paleoelectric current went around them in the mineral construct. And you got to look at some of these older stories. And a lot of this occurs on, like I say, 12,000 year cycles. They call it the galactic cross, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now, if you knew this cycle was coming, 52,000 year cycle on a 12,000, you would have gone through 5 of those. Pretty much we'll round it up to 60,000 years. So perhaps that knowledge was passed down that, yeah, when you get into this flipping of the magnetic poles, you need to protect yourself in this type of mineral or be in this part of the world. Because you look at this, the humans alive today, and the whole about, oh, they're more much like us than we thought they would have been, just does not really line up with historical accounts or myths, legends, stories, children's tales, etc., that talk about how incredibly dangerous these others were to us. You know, it's kind of, you know, talk about gnomes. Okay, great. Were they or were they not? But we get into this, you know, incredibly long timeline of giants and 6-foot humans existing and always battling for supremacy. You know, those giants did not want the human around at the 6-foot level. Everywhere you look in history, you can go through every single culture. They're all there, coexisting, but they were always in perpetual fighting and war, similar to our own world today. So I don't know what's going to happen at the next time that these geomagnetic poles start shifting, rifting, and moving. But what I do see today, and what is a known factor, and Ransom, you could attest to this too, you know, they do a lot of experiments with rats. They have the rat cities. They have, you know, the rat utopias, and they do an enormous amount of experiments with rats. Well, you know, they've done some in the 1950s where they put rats in different chambers, and then they would just change the electromagnetic field. As the electromagnetic field changed, the anger increased. So imagine if the powers that be, and I'll leave them as that, understood that our electromagnetic field of the sun's changing and that we would have an angrier Earth, just strictly based on electromagnetism. Now, some might not notice it as much because they might be more grounded. They're walking with their feet barefoot, and they might, you know, have a reduction of that overcharge in them. That would be the excitation for that anger. But if everybody was running through the same magnetic field changes, then probably 98% of the Earth would not really notice a difference. They would see everybody behaving, but they would be behaving the same. So everybody would just think that everything was exactly normal as it was. But there's been a change in our world, and you can clearly see it. This mental illness thing is increasing. That's electromagnetic field change. And people who ground out can see it more clearly. But something about the electromagnetism change is back again. That cycle is back again. So what would we interbreed with? And this is a true question. So Ransom, I think you might be able to answer it. So if we're coming down 75,000 years ago, 250,000 years, okay, we're interbreeding with Neanderthals, Denisovans, okay, and we pop out. Like you say, we got the human mutt right now, the Heinz 57. What are we going to interbreed with in terms of another human species that allows a continuation of, quote unquote, the species as we move through different magnetic field changes with intensity, heading into the next ice age over another 1,000 years, and we're going to be heading into another ice age, if not sooner. I mean, what's going to be next? Because, I mean, if there's always been interbreeding between different sapiens and different types of humans or human types, then where does that leave us? There's nothing else to interbreed with, is there? I mean, are there you know, the 3-foot tall that they talk about in Indonesia that are running through the forest, or are we going to start getting it on with you know, Sasquatch out there somewhere? I mean, where does this take us in terms of our? It seems like we're kind of at the end of the road in a genetic bottleneck, which you talk about so frequently.
It does kind of seem like, you know, with the reduction of populations and stuff, that there's some kind of weird agenda to play with the genetics. But you opened up a lot there, because really, like, what do we know? You know, you were talking about giants, and it's really kind of funny because when Cro-Magnon shows up on the scene, they're the tallest guy around. They're taller than Neanderthal by, there's up to 6 foot tall, and Neanderthals are short 5 foot guys most of the time, almost always. Bone structure on both Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal are thick bones, large connections where the muscles go. So not only the regular human, Neanderthal and Denisovan, and this is funny because I was showing the article. So sub-Saharan Africans carry 2 to 18 to 19. Other studies put it at 20% of what they're calling a ghost species in an interbreeding event that happened approximately 40,000 years ago. So if you think about that in the context, that means that happened after they're saying that the Homo sapiens left Africa, and the DNA kind of shows that, because most Africans have less than 2% of Neanderthal DNA, or actually it's less than 1%. But if you really think about what's going on here, there's different kind of humans, more types of humans than they're saying there is. I mean, there's several different waves going here and there. And if you think about it, how tall are you? Like, say, because you're a tall guy. I'm only 5'9". Right. And my girlfriend is 5'3" or 4, I think. I might get in trouble there. But anyway, she's short. But our genetics, when you look at where do you come from, there's a giant spectrum of height difference, right, between peoples from the same areas. And, that all depends on who you marry. Did you marry this person or that person? Which genes carry over? So the whole idea is kind of absurd. The only time you get really similar type people is when they're bottlenecked and when they get stuck in an area, or some kind of cultural thing comes along, like, say, all of a sudden big noses are supposed to be the most sexiest thing at all in the culture or whatever, everybody will start marrying people with bigger noses. And then, a couple hundred years later, everybody has a big nose. But their same genetic counterparts that lived in a different area look like they used to look before that cultural thing took over. So there's all kinds of factors in this. And then, thinking about that too is where did because there's a big question, and this is a problem in the fossil record, because when we look at the other human species, they are quite a bit different as far as their rib cage, other kind of physical attributes are quite different than Cro-Magnon or Homo sapien, modern human, whichever term you're using, that just kind of shows up in the fossil record. And they're saying 40,000 years ago, but yet they found examples that are older than that. Which means that, they don't know where some of the species even came from. And like I brought up before, you got to remember that back in these times, the ocean level was way lower than it is today. There was so much more land for people to walk around in. And we're not even mentioning stuff like the Hobbit, that they're calling the Hobbit man, which is kind of weird why they call it that, because it is a human species. And when you start looking at the differences, what really happened, because you can blame it on better lifestyles, agriculture, who knows what, but when you look at any example of one of these archaic humans, including Cro-Magnon, which is supposed to be the modern human, you look at them, they had bigger bones, stronger muscles, something else was going on. And then you look at us today, and then you're asked the question, what will we breed with now? Well, it's funny you say that, because they're making designer humans. This is something that, and it links back to these old stories. Are we actually seeing different versions of created human beings, or did we just all, sprout up in different places and then find each other? It doesn't even matter, because like I was saying, we're introducing new DNA. And I know we can't get too much directly into that topic, but needless to say, we're being introduced to several different new types of DNA that have been proven over time to come through your diet and environment. There's the science of epigenetics, right? So your environment changing what you're doing, what you're eating, what you're exposed to. And then on top of that, there's a different cultural society. Now, look at the difference of people. Like, you could go back to 40,000 years ago. What is a real man? Well, it might be the guy that could go out and beat to death or stab to death some big animal. And that would be like the attributes that might get a female attraction back then, but nowadays it ain't that. What's your bank account? What do you drive? Like things like that. So there's a totally different concept on children bearing now. And then there's the introduction of the elite, which are, they can't help themselves now that they've cracked the code. They want to play with the code. And this has some nefarious undertones, but it also can be used for some great things, obviously. It's kind of cool. I'm actually, next time we talk, I'll actually have probably the DNA results. And I'm going to get the one that actually shows how much archaic DNA that I might have. So in other words, Neanderthal DNA and such, just to find out. Just think about it, that you didn't come from one type of human. And there's not a population on Earth that I'm aware of yet that has been studied that doesn't carry one kind or another kind or multiple kinds of archaic DNA. Which means that, even up into when we know that human beings were starting to do some very impressive stuff, there were a bunch of different kinds still roaming around the earth. And it does put new light on, like tales from Plato of the Atlanteans. Where did they get that idea? He got it from, like his uncle, or I think it was his uncle that wrote about it first. And he supposedly traveled to Egypt and went to, check out the Library of Alexandria, where he probably got some of these books like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which, by the way, is another story of a large superhero type, bigger than all of the rest of the people, man, that's just walking amongst everybody else. And, the little story of having to create an Enkidu to rival him, which was another big giant man, but was hairy and like a beast, and came and hung out with the animals until he was civilized. And how was he civilized? They sent him a woman, right? So there's it's almost a specific, mention of admixture DNA being crossed over and two cultures coming together and the people hanging out in those far back times. So we know this was going on. So a lot of these stories are probably truthful, but they're not like, elves, goblins, hobbits, and stuff like that. They were different kind of humans, and we obviously interbred with most of them because we still carry the DNA. And what's really weird is why the current, educational system, because we've been talking about dumbing down. So all over the country now, they're just removing the standards. So kids don't have to learn how to read. They don't have to learn how to do math. They don't even have to know how to speak English right or correctly. And they're going to pass them through high school. So this is where a lot of knowledge is going to be lost. And then they shove these artificial ideas of manufactured ideas of race. And they boil it down to skin tone, which is completely ridiculous because, there's been genetic tests of people all over Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. And one tribe is more different from another tribe. Like, say you picked somebody on the Ivory Coast and then went into the Congo and then tested their DNA. Their DNA is more different from each other than I am from any other human in Asia, the Americas, or Europe. That's some real genetic diversity right there. And they boil all of the people down there into just Africans, right? And they do the same thing with everybody else. They've tried to boil it down until we get to this weird idea that we're all the same exactly, and therefore we can be treated all the same, and not in a good way like in the Constitution, but as cattle. That's the idea. And you got to wonder who's at the top of this pyramid that's been here all along, that's been deciding, which way humanity's going to go, because we're at that point again. And you bring up the magnetic reversal. There are technologies now that can artificially do the things that you're talking about. And they can do it on a mass scale now that we've built the infrastructure, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, you hit a really important point there. And when you were talking, I actually looked something up here as a graphic image, because you're talking about facial features being different through the times here. And if you were going to start with a base species and you hit it, like what if it's each one of those is just a created species? Because if you go into the Indian text, the Vedic text and the Rig Vedas, etc., and go further back, they're talking about what we know as humans being here for 23 million years so far. 23 million. But if you go back as far as you can, millions of years ago, looking at what we would consider the hominids, non-gorilla, non-chimpanzee species, generally that timeline only goes back 4 million years. So we're between the 4 million years and the 23 million years, then there's almost 20 million years of what was just forgotten. Like what existed between that time and 4 million years ago. And, when I got the chart here, I started to think about when you said base species and different facial features. So I did find a few, and allow me to read them and show them to you here. So the base species, the Australopithecus sediba, S-E-D-I-B-A, looks very similar to a manatee face. It is so elongated. Think about where our eyeballs are. There's barely a nose, and the eyes would be way up into our foreheads, and the rest of it is just sloped straight down. And it looks like it has some sort of mouth that could dig around in the mud, just like manatees do. So was that the base species? Was that species tried to connect with a manatee? Because when you look at the length of these species also, the Australopithecus gari, which is another one that looks like a duckbill. I kid you not, it looks like any modern duck, the way the face comes down, and it looks like it has a bill almost, where the teeth aren't flat like on our lips. They extend way out like you would think. Like I swear to you, they were just trying to cross-breed or cross-species some sort of hominid there with a duck and just trying it. And that's the gari. But you look at this, Australopithecus sediba and Australopithecus gari, they're here for like literally a fifth of an eighth of a second in comparison to everything else, like the Homo naledi and the Homo erectus. Those are the two longest on the entire timeline. Everything else is incredibly short, even the Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. I mean, it's nothing compared to those other two species, Homo erectus and Homo naledi. Oh, they're there for, 1.5 million years on the timeline. Where the other ones that look like, I kid you not, they look like they're interbred with some sort of, waterfowl or something out of the water, manatees. They're there literally for just, less than 100,000 years, or even 50,000. Boom, in and out of the record, and that's it. And if you go further back around, they say 3.5 million years ago, you get what? Kenyathropus platyops. And I kid you not, it looks like a platypus. So, you start to look at these facial features here with afarensis also, like that's an extremely elongated face. Like you look at that and go, how would you chew your food? Like, first of all, how could you view your food, and how would you chew the food? And a lot of these, they don't even look like they have noses. Homo sapien, a skull, obviously you see where the nose is, where the bridge of the nose came out, and it leaves that, it looks like a ramp coming off the front there, where you could clearly see that there was some sort of appendage there. The further you go back, the less nose it is. And you can't tell me, well, it was a flattened nose because they didn't swim and they didn't have a need to have sort of a protruding nose because they didn't swim. Okay, that's garbage for what they try to feed you, is why people have flared out nostrils and why people have elongated, longer, bridge noses, higher bridge, because they're trying to say that it's because those were swimmers, and over 500,000 years, the swimmer had smaller nostrils with a little bit higher bridge to keep the water out, and these kind of things, And you look back at some of these, reconstructions of the faces, and what are these things? And the Naledi also has an incredibly long face, almost like a gorilla face. And you look at this, and it does make sense if the Vedic texts are correct. And there have been what is considered humans on this planet for 23 million years. Then the technology they possessed back then would allow them to create species to work as their worker class. And the different experimentations for me, as I'm looking through this, I'm thinking, are these electromagnetic field complete polar reversals, or are those geophysical reversals at the same time on these timelines? Because as you stretch through history here and through time, what causes the extinction or need to create a new species? And then you have multiple species running at the same time, and boom, they just all disappear, and the only thing left is Homo erectus. So what is with that? If all those species were running at the exact same time and they all disappeared on the exact same time, then there must have been a massive cataclysm. And if it were, well, you would just probably choose the same one that survived and just multi-replicate that one. Because you look back here again, we are the replicatable species as a worker class right now because we can exist in this magnetic field with this frequency coming off of our sun the way it is, the way our brains are functioning. And I really believe a lot of the chaos you're seeing in the world is to put that scatter wave out because we are piercing the veil to be able to see this darkness and this whatever construct of control around us is becoming more and more visible for everybody day by day. And I do believe, that we're coming into an electromagnetic field change off of the sun. Definitely at least on the minimum 400-year cycle. Further afield, 2,000-year cycle, what is it? But as we see some species disappear, were they re-engineered as a new worker class for whatever had higher technologies over the last millions of years? Or was it the one that survived during the cataclysm, was coddled and nurtured? And those stories of beings coming out from beneath the ground to reteach them were nothing more than getting the conditions right so the chattel can continue to reproduce to have the worker class on the planet without really having to do much. It's kind of like thinking, if you were to find an animal that you wanted to keep, that you wanted to help you graze the grass on your area, produce milk for you, produce eggs for you, whatever it is, you give it a habitat that it can exist. And there you go. So, looking at this human story from millions of years ago until present, is it truly the story of these things just came up and there was natural infighting for it and all of them disappeared on the same timelines and then just one existed and then everything from that point collapsed and then we're the only one left? Or is there a deeper story to it? And Ransom, I know you're going to have an answer for me, man, because you always do. You seem to read my mind on these topics.
Well, I think what you're seeing is evidence of cataclysms. You have different pockets of different peoples in different places. And you know what? If you got down to say it's your tribe, half your tribe gets killed, the area where all of your population was killed, volcano, earthquake, tsunami, whatever. Maybe it is the sun doing it. And there's some evidence that kind of, may shed some light on that because it seems that Neanderthal did not have the DNA to basically be out in UV radiation like Homo sapiens did. And there's a what I think is the fingerprints of cataclysm. Like here's an article from Routers right here. It's talking about ghost ancestors. African DNA study detects mysterious human species. And before we get into that, you were talking about what was the one with the N? I can never pronounce it. You were talking about Natalia or something like that.
They spell it Naledi, Naledi. I think is Latin.
That's the right one. I always mess up the name, but anyway, there's something really weird about that specific species because there's a site in Africa where it proves that species had some kind of understand. Well, it doesn't prove it exactly. I guess it's open to interpretation. However, some very bizarre behavior out of that hominid. They were burying, or not exactly burying, but hiding the dead from their family. So like they have this cave that's really hard to climb into. So when they discovered it, it was like wow, right? Because you got all of these bones in there that are 300,000 years old at least or more. And inside there is children, grandma, grandpa, people that look like they got wounded from falling. And I am calling them people, even though they're saying, it's not a human like we think about it. However, they were probably making tools. They were probably hunting, and most likely they had some kind of idea of the afterlife. If nothing else, they didn't want animals to molest their loved ones. You know what I mean? Like animals messing with it or whatever. Because at first they thought maybe, some kind of animal was killing them and then dragging them in this elaborate tunnel system to get to this main opening. But then when they studied all the bones, they realized none of them had animal wounds, and they were all either died from disease or old age, basically. And that means that this hominid was going through the trouble of carrying the species, the bodies through this elaborate tunnel system so that other peoples or whatever couldn't get in there, and they were hiding there. So it's a really bizarre behavior that goes back a long time ago. They don't believe that's a direct ancestor to us, I don't think. However, it does show that we have no idea how long some of the intelligent behaviors that we attribute to being human beings have been on the earth. Now, back to this study of the ghost species, because this is very interesting, and they really, don't want people to start studying this topic because it really puts a perspective on how many different human beings there were, and it puts kind of a twist on the idea of us being like this singular human that just moved out from one spot. The study indicates that present-day West Africans trace a substantial proportion, some 2% to 19% of their genetic ancestry to an extinct human species they don't know what is, because they don't have DNA to compare it with. And researchers are calling it a ghost population, and they estimate that this interbreeding event occurred approximately 43,000 years ago. Now, this is the same time that Cro-Magnon skeletons and stuff are being found first in the fossil record in this 10,000 year period right here. Before that, there's no modern human. We just pop up, and they, every Cro-Magnon skeleton they find is basically no different than a present day European. This event has DNA that is in people. Yeah, Homo sapiens, it says they first appeared 300,000 years ago. But whenever they start talking about a modern anatomically correct human, meaning with a chin that's developed for chewing, that seems like they've had agriculture in their past for some time, probably millions of years, even though they won't say that. This shows that all the way up until 40,000 years ago, not only were humans breeding in Europe with Neanderthal, they were breeding in Asia with Neanderthal and Denisovan, and Denisovans were breeding back and forth with Neanderthal and back and forth. But also in Africa, it seems humans actually went in to Africa, not out of Africa, because when they went in, they carried some Neanderthal DNA, but just a little bit of it. But no other people in the world carry this 20% DNA of this ghost population. None, not anywhere else in the world, only there. And that means that there was another unnamed human species, or they're calling it archaic, but it's still a human species that people mixed with at that time, which means that, in my opinion, that's evidence of cataclysm. That means that there were humans running from something about 43,000 years ago. And you remember, you were talking about the magnetic. This is the last time that the magnetic field was shrank down on the Earth. So there, people were getting high doses of UV radiation at this time. And it seems like the populations of the humans might have been very small. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been interbreeding in new areas. And it seems to be they were migrating all over the place to find new people, new places. And then, as societies progress, obviously, they start using or utilizing other populations and building things. And we see that all through the historical event. And I know a lot of people are surprised to know that human slavery has been in our existence the entire time, all the way back to the first writings of human beings anywhere. So that means human beings were already, 8,000 years ago and up for sure, going around and enslaving other groups of human beings to do work, to build things. And, so it wasn't always just interbreeding, but massive cooperation between two different types of species over time. And that puts a new perspective on why things turned out the way they did in different places. So we don't even know if there's another species of human, because this topic is so taboo. And I point you in the direction of the Paracas people and the Wari people of Peru. No one wants to bring them up because they have Euro-Asian DNA. And other skulls exactly like that, elongated, and it appears because they found different bodies that have fetuses in the mother, that they were born that way.
Can't talk about that. Hey, I was trying to be more specific. Rig Vedas when I referenced the Vedic texts. Thank you for the comments. We'll be right back. Take a small break. Releasing the show notes from our programs, just bullet point list of what we talked about so you can start the conversation with others or do a deep dive in your own research. Head over to oilseedcrops.org. In the nav bar, you'll see MIAC radio show. Click there, put your email, and we'll get that out to you on a weekly. And please remember, with YouTube's algorithm running today, like, subscribe, and click that bell to get notified.
Cloned food, edited food, fake food, and unhealthy foods of all kinds. That's not what Mama was cooking when you were a little bambino. You want to know what's in your food. I know you do. Heaven's Harvest has Protein Booster Kit is the bolster of your daily emergency meal plan. Containing only essential proteins, beef, chicken, and eggs, stock up on vital amino acids and nutrients required to thrive in all situations. They got the fruits and vegetable buckets, the breakfast bucket kits, and for you health food nuts, they got an organics kit. Now that's knowing what's in your food. They even got the heirloom seed kit so you can plant your own food. Heaven's Harvest Heirloom Vegetable Seed Kit is a simple way to start storing seeds safely. Not sure what varieties are hardy, easy growers, which thrive and taste the best. They have taken the guesswork and time out of the process of seed saving. Now you know what's in your food because you grew it. Go to heavensharvest.com. You can save 15% at the checkout with code ADAPT.
In the ancient world, gold was magical. Gold was a manifestation of the sacred, and objects fashioned from it were a means of connecting with a supernatural world. Far from passive deposits of wealth, gold was sacred. It was greatly prized in cult. Objects made of gold were active agents in an ongoing engagement with powerful forces. The Inca used gold to make ritual objects, combinations of gold and silver and gold and copper called tumbaga. Wearing gold jewelry was a sign of a person's wealth and power. For the Inca, gold was also the blood of Viracocha, their sun god. For the Mayan people and many others in ancient America, gold was part of a complex symbolic system. Gold is mentioned in Greek mythology for examples as varied as King Midas, the golden fleece stolen by Jason who possessed the power of resurrection, through to the golden apples of Hesperides. The golden apples were guarded by the 100-headed dragon Ladon. The dragon conferred immortality on whoever ate them. Over the past 5,000 years, from the Egyptian pharaohs and the merchants of 14th century Venice to world governments in the space age, man has treasured gold for its utility and value during times of both prosperity and disparity. Through the rise and fall of great dynasties and civilizations, gold has maintained its purchasing power as a reliable store of value for millennia. Gold has been used as money since 560 BC, when King Croesus of Lydia created a gold coin in his own image. Ever since, it has continued to increase its long-term value and remains the world's most universally accepted form of money. Today, the demand for gold continues to flourish globally. History proves that fiat paper money is designed to go to zero through inflation, whereas gold has intrinsic value in which it maintains forever. Paper money is a debt instrument. Gold is an asset of wealth in its own right. It does not depend upon any governments, corporations, or individuals' promise to repay. ITM Trading has spent the last 27 plus years developing a team of expert researchers and analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn or currency collapse. Schedule your free gold and silver strategy call 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422. Or go to learn.itmtrading.com/MIAC and keep watching Mountain High Time and Mini Ice Age Conversations if you know what's good for
network. Thank you for inviting us on. Streaming right here, originating revolution.radio, allowing us the free speech venue to continue our conversations. Thank you so much. If you feel free speech is something that you appreciate, consider a donation right there. Revolution Radio, top in the nav bar. Many ways to donate because our world's spinning. And, a lot of people at the governmental levels, they talk about, we want to have all this freedom of speech and everything, yet they're trying to close down Al Jazeera because Al Jazeera is somehow giving a different perspective on things that we're seeing. Shit.
We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by. No, I'm just kidding. Sound like something happened there, though. But
oh, it did. It did indeed. I thought I came back a little late, and
yeah, I don't know. We'll see. We'll give him a second because I
Can
must
you
have
hear
had
me,
an
Ransom?
event. Anyway,
I need to.
what's going on in the world? World War III, man. Whoa. Now there's a weird echo.
Ransom.
Weird. There it is.
I know. I'm
think we've
trying to
caught
join you. I'm trying to join you.
There you are.
You hear me? There we are. Ransom, please give me a sound check if you got one. I need to hear that I was back online again.
Yes, I hear you loud and clear now. Yeah, I don't know what that was. I was talking to you and it went off, I guess. I don't know.
No, it did. I was just saying, for the second hour here, thank you. We're up on two different stations tonight, freeworld.fm and also Independent Broadcast Network taking us on. Message seems to be getting through to those who have ears to hear. What I don't like is now all those that are so like, oh, we believe in free speech, now want to shut down Al Jazeera. It makes no sense. So if you consider free speech something valid, please consider a donation right here to Revolution Radio. Because, look, they're trying to get Al Jazeera taken down planet-wide right now because they have a differing opinion, and there are a lot of live reporters on the ground. And they were targeting the reporters, too. And, it's just ridiculous that, you supposedly have all these ideals, yet you want to stifle the press. And you just see it's just the hypocrisy is neck deep.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like they don't like two sides of a story, which I'm totally against. That's what I really hate about today's times is that they're trying to set it up with this idea that they will decide what you believe, and you won't believe your eyes. And, I'm not a fan of believing in any news source. I like to look at all of them, check it, vet it, look at the opposing opinions, find out what people like are kind of independent to each side are saying a fact is. And still, you might not get the real idea. And it's, I like talking about the ancient humans because the more you talk about it, like you could get closer up to more, in history. And let's just talk about all the bloody wars that have happened over the times, the crusades back and forth, the invasions of here and there. You could go through the Chinese history. You could go through European history. You could go through African history or North African history. There's just armies all the way back in time, way back when. Phoenicians, Vikings. I mean, like you could just pick an era. And for somebody to say now that, we're evolved and we're totally different than those archaic humans and those people back then, obviously not, because the same things are going on. Or the same force driving, destabilizing, and stunting human enlightenment is present and has been present the entire time. Because that's what it kind of seems like, doesn't it? I mean, why is it that humans, even so good at keeping track of history, seem to keep repeating the same exact things and then relabeling it? And that's why I take no side. I'm against democide by government of any government. I don't believe in, we see over and over again that governments around the world, including our own, continually lie to us, and they use media to lie to us. So I'm totally against any kind of censorship or handling of what one person calls misinformation versus another, because it's our job to do our due diligence, to do our own educational research, to find out what's more factual, what's not factual, and make our own opinions on everything. Because I've been listening to some other radio shows too, and it's so polarized. People are just like they're so on one side or another of any topic. You could just pick any topic. But right now it's war, it's religious politics and stuff. It's guns, from what happened last night. And I did want to point out to everybody that for the second time in U.S. history, an entire area was locked down by the federal government over the actions of one person or, a couple of people. And we are supposed to live in a land of inalienable constitutional rights. However, whenever the establishment decides those rights don't matter, they trample them. And, you could say it's for safety or whatever you want, but I'm down with the founders in that I would rather have, freedom than security, because people that give up their freedom deserve neither. And I believe that. And, it was crazy and it's sad to see what's going on all over the world. But when hasn't it been? And that's kind of why I like, thinking about archaic humans, because they were out figuring the world out for real, right? They probably had all kinds of different beliefs. And, we were talking about Neanderthals. And I think you said something about, somebody had a theory about maybe Neanderthals made of hunted humans. And I've never read anything to that effect or any evidence, but Neanderthal, like for years, they tried to tell us that was our direct ancestor, that we were all cavemen, right? And then they find out, oh, wait, no, there was a modern human at the same time. Oh, okay. Neanderthals are our cousins. Okay. They're just dumb brutes, though, that live in caves. And then, the more that we study them and find artifacts from them, the more that we realize they had some sort of culture. They lived completely different than humans. Like, for example, in most human societies, the men go out and explore the world. But it seems like the exchange in genetic material in the Neanderthal world was mainly driven by the female. The female would leave her village or her clan or whatever it was to them and go find other males somewhere else. So that might be part of the reason, human beings came across this female looking for other males. I mean, think about it. Their whole hundreds of thousands of years, they were supposedly doing it the same way, where they would have big meetings. And these are things that people don't, associate with Cro-Magnon. They just think it's this big ape-like, human being that was dumb, and he just went around, organized and killed these giant animals. He was so dumb. But it turns out they had, ideas maybe of the afterlife, like they would bury flowers with people. They found graves of Neanderthal. There's forms of art. And if you remember last week, I was showing you a 200,000-year-old art. It was basically art where some little kids came and they found some muddy cement-like material and they put their hands and feet in it and signed it 200,000 years ago. Most likely some Denisovan children. I mean, they don't know because it's just handprints and footprints. So we have no idea on that. I trip out on this thing because they're not going to let us go. So we're going into World War III and they don't care what you think about it. But it's so weird to see the populace instantaneously pick the new cause and pick a side, right? I don't believe either side is innocent in any way, but I can say that I don't support any government or group of people or religion or doctrine or organization or anything like that that agrees with or rationalizes the idea of killing innocent civilians for some kind of political agenda. And that is what is textbook terrorism. So it doesn't matter who's doing it, if it's the Russian military, if it's the Ukrainian military, if it's Chinese or Americans, or it doesn't matter. Israeli, Palestinian, Iran, it doesn't matter. I'm against any people that think that it's okay to exterminate other human beings for whatever purpose. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm against that, all of it. I guess that puts me out there as an outlier because I'm not picking any religious people or any national doctrine other than my own, which is the American doctrine of independent, individual, free lifestyle with my own pursuit of happiness, and that I can agree that every other human being has the same, exactly the same inalienable rights that I have, as long as their freedoms don't endanger my freedoms. And people forget, they think the governments of the U.S. is there to protect them or keep them safe, but that is exactly false and factually untrue. The only job of the American government was to protect our inalienable rights. And, if you look through time, they haven't done a very good job about it because they have separate agendas. And what do we do about the idea of, the empires, the big empire? And I'm not talking about the little g government as national, because that's where most people are in their mentality. They're still on the idea that nations are ran within themselves and controlled by the governments therein. And over, we see that that is not true. There is a world governing body that directs these actions around the world. They give it the okay. They give it the funding. They give it the arms. They give it the training. And we see this over and over again from all sides of these proxies. So my advice to everybody is stock up. Stock up now because there's a lot of haters out there that are trying to make life harder than it has to be.
Yeah, and those Chinese destroyers on their way over there, maybe they're going to deter the rainbow pirates from pillaging outbound tankers. Who knows in this mixed up world? Hey, man, but you were asking me, in today's world, what kind of car do you drive compared to, well, I drive a woolly mammoth. So does that put me in something special in the category walking between worlds, where if you could take down a woolly mammoth 40,000 years ago, you were the most wanted dude in the village. But today, I don't want to be driving a Bentley. Those things are old school. I want to be driving a Mammoth. Can you step between worlds? Now, the reason I was bringing that up, because I did look up that book here talking about Neanderthal predation on modern humans, to try to circle back there for a second. This thing about statism and we can, if you look at this book here with Neanderthal predation, and Neanderthals were apex predators, as they have quoted, and this was Danny Vendramani. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. It's called Them and Us. And it really goes through all the stories, bone remnant fragments and things that what you might have considered being attacked by an animal were actually the tooth marks of these Neanderthals nibbling on the bones as much as we would nibble on a on a rib bone or prepare it as such. So this book is like 386 pages long of evidence showing that. There's a different view, on what is and what was our recollection or thoughts of history. Now bring that into the modern world here. And the only reason what any of this scam works from the central banking, because it's each individual country's central banks, to the militaries, to everything else, statism. That is the ultimate lie. That is the ultimate scam. You're right. They've got you all focused on the individual countries. But there is a higher governing body above that institutes the statism. Because if there were no borders, and I'm not talking this utopian, thing that they try to fill your mind with. I'm talking on a spiritual sense where we are from the Creator. We are the creation. We're part of the creation. We all from the Creator and return to the Creator. When we're here for this short time on this planet, there should be no warfare between us. Because why would you want to hurt, maim, or kill another part of your own self? Because coming from the creation and part of it, and from the Creator part of it, then that person standing next to you is from that same Creator and part of that as well. But as we grow up and as we are indoctrinated through education, the thing is, what's the very first thing they teach you? You are from this country. You are born into this country, this nation. And they start it very small with, you have to affiliate yourself with that football team of this school. And that's really the way they get it in. They start you off on this. It's this school. It's these colors. It's this football team. Yeah. Go, go, go. Team, team, team. And as you're brought up, it's all about, it suddenly changes from a football jersey into a flat piece of fabric with different colors on it that waves in the wind. Statism is the one single thing that allows all the other evils on this planet to continue. If you did not believe there were different countries, there would be no central banks of different countries. If you did not believe there were borders, then there would be no wars between nations over land and land dispute. See, the very thing that they have to condition you with first is that there are fictitious drawings of maps. Yeah, I could understand a river or a mountain range, but look at the last 200 years. How many times have our maps changed? Post-World War I changed. Post-World War II changed again. And how many times, why is it every year the number of nations increases and decreases? Because I was just looking at Eritrea and the problems they're having over there. But that used to be part of the Sudan, and then the Sudan's broken up, North Sudan, South Sudan, and then Eritrea broke off into its own independent nation from that. So, we're always seeing the globe redrawn with different maps and borders. Now, after this, whatever it is, and it occurs and amplifies, and then it comes to an apex and then decreases, and we are going to see, I promise you, we are going to see our map redrawn across this planet once again. And this time they'll probably leave it to the AI to redraw the map to try to put everybody together for the most homogeneous and peaceful solution for a minute. But then again, it shall change, because this whole, 80-year cycle of the fourth turning, they have to have the prosperity phase come in again. But think about how it all revolves around statism. Everything you're seeing today would not be one iota of a thing if there were no such thing as countries or country borders. And again, I don't misconstrue my words of this utopian one world government garbage that they're trying to feed us as well. Or the AI, one global governing body garbage that they're trying to feed us. It just doesn't. It won't work. It might appear to, I'll have an AI redraw all the maps based on, the 1910 tribal affiliations and have it redraw, so all the tribes go back together again, and all the national peoples split like Pakistan and India, come back together again, and homogeneousness rules the planet. Well, that's going to be fashions. That's going to be factions clashing within their own fashions once those borders are redrawn to see who again remains, just like the Neanderthals, the apex predator. Because think about it just for a second, if they redrew the Indian and Pakistani borders to pre-England and post-World War I and II redrawing of those borders, can you imagine what that would be like, where they're going to vie for power once again of who controls that region, especially those regions in, if you go out Jaipur and these areas, further out to the west, and that desert area was all part of what was, they did that on purpose. The English were infamous for drawing lines directly between and causing purposeful fighting based on the borders that they redrew. Oh, they're infamous for that. And you can see it time and time again. Go take a look at some of the further maps back in the 1600s and see how borders were drawn. Go back to the Roman era and see how borders were redrawn. And this whole thing of the allegiance for the nation, that's where they get everybody stuck. Because there's different farming techniques for each individual nation. And I look at it in kind of a macabre way of, we don't have countries, we have farms. Their farming techniques are different for each region. And when I say that, I'm really talking about farming techniques for control of human output. Now, sometimes the farm changes, just like it does with the seasons. The farm needs to produce something different. Perhaps it needs to produce more hay during the summertime, so they'll stop grazing in certain areas so they can, bring up hay and then roll it into the round bales, and they'll keep all of anything that will graze on that off of the land for a certain amount of time. That's no different than setting up national parks and redrawing borders so people don't go into these areas. That's no different than resetting everybody into the cities. Because I look at it as with the electromagnetic field changes, what's going to be produced or what is going to be a need for production is not going to be the same need that we had for production in the 1980s and 1990s coming up. It's completely shifted now. So the production means, or the end result of farming humans on these things we call countries, farms, is going to change exponentially. And I already see it already is into that change phase of what is the end product that will be needed? Well, currently it seems like these ethereal energies are being milked for the very darkest and low vibration that they can be. And that seems to be an end product that is out for collection across the universe right now. But I just, I come back to it, statism, Ransom, is the biggest lie we were ever told. And bringing it up is a no-no also, along with elongated skulls in the womb, dude.
Yeah, I don't know. I brought up the elongated skulls thing is just because there's a type of people there that are just outside of history, right? And there's a lot of assumptions put on them of who they were, where they're from, but then they DNA test them and they happen to come from Eurasia, where other skulls are found like that. And it's a weird phenomenon that the mainstream wants to, say, oh, well, they binded their heads like that. They have to because these other people over here did that, right? But not necessarily, obviously. The weird thing about the Paracas people, though, is kind of what I was going to point out, is that they were genetically tested, and they have red hair, they have blonde hair, they have Eurasian DNA on the mitochondrial side, or the mother's side of the DNA. The paternal DNA, or the father's side of it, is unknown. Unknown, meaning that they have no idea, or it got damaged so bad they can't tell. But that's not really what they said. They just said unknown. So it's an unknown hominid species that was alive in the recent past, right before the Paracas people moved to Peru. And another weird thing is, like, they knew that there were these megalithic structures in Peru, because they went almost for a beeline right to it in Peru. And they set up their culture right outside of it next to the Inca, who were there at the same time. And then we know that the Inca, after the Nazca people came along, the Nazca people basically genocided the Paracas people. There's a giant pit of Paracas skeletons that have holes punched in their skulls. And it's obvious that some kind of large violent event happened, right? And then they just disappear. But not all the way. They show up in Incan areas that are controlled by the Inca. And then the royalty of the Inca all of a sudden has elongated heads. And then after that, the heads start to shrink over time. And all of these heads now have what are called Inca bones, which only the Inca people have, which are little notches on the back of the skull. And over time, they disappear. They just totally disappear into the genetics there. And the reason I brought that up is because that's an obvious unknown thing. And you know, think about this and compare it to modern times of what's going on, let's say, in the Middle East. This book that you're talking about, kind of from what I gathered, insinuates that maybe a group or groups of Neanderthals over time possibly found a new animal, in their opinion, in their forests, another creature out there hunting that was probably human. And if you were in the human group and you're new to the area, like you've just moved in there and you're starting to hunt there and things are largely unknown to you, but then you come across somebody that is local and they have a different hunting style and they look just a little bit different, and say they drag off one of your children and then you find out later they ate them. How many times is that going to happen before somebody in whatever, you know, religious, political, or tribal group was at the time and says, you know what, we got to get rid of these guys. All of them, not just some of them, but all of them. And then there's some group of Neanderthal that never even considered cannibalizing other people. And who's to say that some of the Neanderthals didn't even cannibalize other people? Because, you know, we're not innocent of that as the main Homo sapiens species. There's evidence of that everywhere, where people were eating other people either to scare them or, to absorb their power, as in some cultures, or just because they were sick in the head and they just didn't see any difference between that. And if you think another human is a different species, then wouldn't it be easier to eat them? And like I said, either way that went, you can't imagine it going on for very long before one group decides to destroy the other group for their own safety. And it kind of brings us to today, because that's the argument being made. If one person does something or a group of people does something, do we punish an entire people? And it's not just going on in the Middle East. And I know people are thinking that, well, they killed children. Okay, so we're going to bomb some children. Okay, well, but you can't be bombing children. Yeah, but they're going to grow up and they're going to hate us and they're going to kill more children. Okay, so that's the mentality. And over here in the U.S., they're using the exact same psychology. So every time a mass shooter happens, what they do is try to gather everybody as a nation and punish them. There's 350 million citizens and probably 30 to 40 million people that are not citizens here. And a large amount of them own guns. And guess what? They don't wake up every day and go do a mass shooting. So what they're trying to do is say, well, this guy went crazy and he did this, so let's punish everybody who didn't do it. It's the same psychology of grouping a whole group together. And then think of this modern thing that they've tried to do to really divide humans and cause turmoil. Mexico, right, is a nation. It's a nation state, just like the United States is a nation state. But you don't call people, people around the world call Americans Americans, but, us Americans don't just look at each other and go, hey, you're an American race. However, they have trained the entire world to do that to other nations. Like, so if you live in Mexico, people consider you the Mexican race. Like, Mexico is a race. It's not a race. It's a group of all kinds of different people that live there. And over time, the demographics have changed and they've blended, just like classically what we were talking about with archaic humans. There was native peoples there. There was Mayans. There was Aztec. There was all of these different, Toltec. We got all of these different people. They mix with the Spanish people. And then, you have modern day versions of the same thing where people are talking about La Raza. like if the nation is a race. And this whole idea is a fallacy. It's make-believe. Your nationality doesn't make you a specific race. That's silly, because you could go down to the edge of Mexico where it borders Guatemala, and guess what? The people on the Mexican side have the same DNA as the people on the Guatemalan side. They eat the same foods. They speak the same language. They have the same ancestry. Yet we're calling them different people as if they're different races. And how many times have you heard somebody say, well, what are you? Well, I'm half Korean and I'm half Irish. Really? Those are not, you know what I mean? That's a nationality for one. And the whole idea, like, people here in the U.S. will say, well, I'm Irish. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. You came from Ireland? Oh, no. Well, my parents are Irish. Oh, they are from Ireland. No. My grandparents were from Ireland. Oh, you mean since, back in the 1800s. So you have no idea what you are now as far as that. And by the way, that was a nationality that you're pointing out. And so they have everybody confused, and it's so easily for them to do that. So like you go to areas like Albuquerque or Florida or wherever, and they will say, well, there's a Latin community. But then they will segregate them further and say, well, there's a Cuban community, there's a Puerto Rican community, there's a Dominican community, there's a Mexican community, a Guatemalan community, a El Salvadorian community, and then they will set the groups off against each other, by segregating them all in this way. And the whole idea of coming to the United States was to assimilate and become the American race, which the word race really doesn't even apply to human beings, but it does in the traditional sense. Like if you were reading a book from Plato, they talk about a race of people, meaning just a group of people that lived in a city, had nothing to do with their, DNA. There was probably a mix of people there at that time. And like, say you said a race of Atlanteans. What does that even mean? How do you know who the people were that might have lived in Atlantis? And if Atlantis was, as it's claimed to be, a great seafaring nation, they probably went all over the place and they deposited DNA there. And that's kind of, getting back to the point. We see that in modern times, like the Basque people, for example, their language group doesn't match any other Indo-European languages at all. It just comes out of nowhere. They have their own language. They say they're from Atlantis. And then you got the Berbers of North Africa and the Guanche people of the Canary Islands that unfortunately disappeared with the Spanish invasion of those islands in the Azores. But they were a group of archaic people that, according to anthropologists, were Cro-Magnon people, like a non-mixed Cro-Magnon human being. And they were these 6 to 7 foot tall, redheaded people that just were sitting on this island all this time, and nobody found them. Like, they're not mentioned in history. The Phoenicians didn't mention them. All of these other Vikings didn't mention them. They were just sitting there doing their thing, building pyramids out of rocks, hunting animals, doing stuff on that island. They were a Neolithic culture living in almost modern times, right? And then the Spanish invasion killed them. And we find that all over the world, where disease gets spread and people disappear because they have been separated for a large amount of time from other people's not coming across or, getting those immunities. And this whole fallacy is what they keep using in the entire world time after time. And it makes you wonder, why are humans so susceptible to the simple idea? Like, I don't remember what the experiment's called, but you remember there was an experiment that was repeated, and I'll look it up in a minute to find the name of it. But they gathered normal people, and they gave half of them prisoners' uniforms and the other half prison guard uniforms. And within weeks, each group started to act like what the uniform represented, and started acting exactly like that position or that part. And immediately they began to have a tribalism. And so they repeat this experiment, and it happens again. So whenever you're, the biggest example of this, I think, in modern times is the 2016 election, where it's seemingly, half of the people of the United States decided to wear a uniform to segregate themselves from the other, which is a big mistake in my opinion, because when you have two groups like that are obvious, then they start pointing directions at each other. So before that, Americans were just Americans, and you might be Democrat, you might be Republican or whatever, but there was no uniform that you wore. You wouldn't walk down the street and go, oh, look, that's the guy from the other side. He disagrees with me on like 3 things that the government told me to argue about. And you think about these discussions, they always do that. They give you an argument, and then they let the people argue about it. Meanwhile, they pass the bills that go through the government where both sides of the supposed fake left-right paradigm, they vote for the same things. Watch us. We'll go into World War III. You can have a bunch of people on both sides saying they don't agree with it, or they pick this side or that side and it's unfair. But overall, we're going to have this war because the elite, the group that no one's paying attention to, the non-nationalist group of people that think they run the world, well, they might be right about that. They are deciding when we're going to have pandemics, when we're going to have pandemic responses, when we're going to have war, when we're going to have a response to that war, how long the war is going to last. And most of all, what people forget is this is all a murky cloud of distraction so that you don't pay attention who controls the actual wealth, which is who controls the actual resources of life, the water, the air, the food. Those are the things that, they're hiding behind that. And I just saw an article showing maybe people will get serious about the price changes and stuff. Here's an article. I know this is off topic, but it just shows the era that we're in and what's most important, right? So people are freaking out right now because cocoa price soars to the highest in 44 years. Wow. What are we going to do without chocolate? I mean, yet another, sugary snack to help us get through all of the stuff that they're showing on the world stage. And it all boils down to this. When are they going to actually pull the plug on a massive enough scale where human beings have to deal with food rations? And, we can be as positive we want, and we talk about archaic humans all we want, but one thing they all had to deal with is cataclysm, starvation, and adaptation. They had to adapt or we wouldn't be here as the mutt species we are today. And who knows what will be, after we allow the government elite and the forces of world governance to control the essence of life, which is the DNA that creates food, animals, and us. And they are manipulating that. So who knows what's even going to be around in the next 10,000 years? If you've got to fast forward 10,000 years in the future and compare it to us, how different are we going to be from us compared to the human species that lived 40,000 years ago all over the planet, seemingly? And, it's not even that far-fetched. I wonder why people have a hard time understanding that there were this many humans. I mean, look at any other animal group and then look at the Pleistocene versions of those animal groups. Big everything. Everything was different. It was a totally different world. And that all happened because things change over time. And now we have a sophisticated enough ruling structure that they're going to use the change to design the future. Does that make sense? And we have to hijack that any way we can to remain a free, independent being on this planet.
Yeah, well, I could answer that. How would we be remembered? Well, you look right now and they group everybody into like pre-Columbian Americas or that group of time. That whole area has just been lumped into one thing, pre-Columbian Americas. Well, maybe we are going to be remembered as the pre-alien invasion Americas. Because something significant is on the doorstep that is going to change this planet forever. So, just as significant as that period of time in the 1490s was to that area of the planet, how much it changed. And that was the stepping stone to all the changes, the gold and all the metals and all these things. And like you should talk about sugar and, the cocoa. And then I saw orange juice is at a 35-year high right now, a 37-year high, depending on how you look at that. But you got to think how the world spun on a dime and twisted from that contact period. So look at it, those two divisiveness of time. You can slice that an incredibly thin layer there of pre and post, that pre-Columbian Americas, and then, what's going to happen now with the pre-alien invasion Americas? Because after that happens, because I could see a couple of things. I sent you those links today talking about Above Majestic. It's this documentary. And one thing I found so fascinating about it when I was watching it, just listening in the background, was that they were saying extraterrestrials came in and disabled all of the nuclear weapons on both sides, on the Soviet Union side and the U.S. side, and melted component parts inside, and they were rendered non-functional. And that was the reason that we haven't had a nuclear war since, because they literally couldn't launch anything. Nothing would work at that time, even though we were that close. Like some sort of alien intervention stopped all of that from humanity. So fast forward with me on this one here. That's why I say pre-alien invasion Americas. So imagine if there is the first nuke that gets dropped somewhere, middle of Kazakhstan, to take out the oil pipelines and all the rail routes and things between, Russia and China that would derail the BRICS. But as soon as the first one goes off, it doesn't matter where it goes off. As soon as it starts to make the news headlines, can you imagine if out of interdimensional space, like hundreds of thousands of alien craft just pop out in a second? Like, that's the alien invasion, and we'll spin it right back to, we are here to save you. We are here to save you. Take us to your leaders. And, how could that play itself out? Because, that would be just as significant of a remembrance in history. Like, everybody alive on the planet would remember this moment in time. It would be that significant of a pre and a post, so cleanly split in that year, that it would be a moment remembered in history for all of humanity. Now, whether it is true or Project Bluebeam, or those are our own electrogravitics craft that are somehow able to cloak and then instantly uncloak themselves, does not matter. The shock to the psyche would be written about in people's journals and diaries and tucked inside their walls and stone carvings, and people would just freak out. People would actually carve stuff in stone about this event. I guarantee you, even in a modern era, there'd be people out there with chisels going, the alien, yeah. So people would never forget. The way it would shock the psyche of the planet. As much as you think this oil stoppage will shock the planet and bring us into food shortages, which would shock the society and civilization, it would. It would be, but that's already been done. Now people can grow food in their homes. Now you got community gardens. People can come together. There's a lot more networking. It's not like just dropping people in the middle of the desert with no water and making them farm. There's a lot of solutions now that can be implemented and rolled out pretty quickly. So I don't think the food hunger aspect would be as great as it might be portrayed with the oil embargo and the shutting down of supply chains based on oil availability. I think people are going to come together. If the internet stays up, that's a big if. But these cards have been played already with humanity. They need something bigger, more grandiose, something that is so far outside the box that it can bring in a one world government. And a bunch of starvation and a bunch of oil getting cut off and a nuke or two dropped off here and there. That's not going to do it. That's definitely not going to do it. Because most people would step out and go, you did that on purpose. I can't believe you did that. How, and start pointing a bunch of fingers. Like, who dropped that thing over there? I can't believe you guys dropped that. That's the most horrendous thing that's ever. And it would split just as it is now. It would split it down the middle. Like half the globe would be like, nope, we're not going along with that. Ridiculous, because you dropped that. I can't believe you detonated one of those. Nope, I could never be on a side that detonated a nuke. Like, I don't care. I'll go to my ground. I'll never be on that side. That would polarize the world even more. And again, the whole oil embargo, that's been done before in the 70s. Starvation, we've seen this around forever. It has to be something new and novel. It truly does. I mean, cryptids, vampires, I don't know. Are what we're looking at, is this play through time here? I wanted to go a little woo-woo, but I was trying to connect the two ideas because there was a show on Netflix about all of the global leaders that you know today are actually vampires. And some of the ones that you see, like the really old ones that go off, like King Charles and Soros and who else is that? Kissinger, and they look like they're just so old and decrepit and thing. They're incredibly powerful vampires that starve themselves to make them look emaciated and white and pale, and then controlling media, they fake their own passings, but as soon as they do, they pounce on like 50 humans and regenerate their bodies again to live for another 1,000 years. This kind of woo-woo out there in terms of who controls this planet. Is it an off-world entity controlling this farm as the Earth, or is it these ancient beings that live off the sustenance of energy off the human that continue to control the domain of the money and the power and the armies across the world? But whatever it is to reset this, to get us to a one world government, I don't care. It's going to take something super gigantic, way outside the norm and possibility of anybody for the shock and awe. We've seen enough bombs dropped already. That's not going to do it. It's going to have to be something on literally interdimensional or extraterrestrial side of it to bring in the awe factor of, we can't ever let this happen again. Yeah, for sure AI can do it. It's way smarter, and we messed up as humans because we can't think fast enough. The AI is going to solve all the problems. Let's give it all over to AI as a one unified system for the globe. Speaking of Basque Country, I knew a dude from Basque Country as I'm like winding up the thought here. I knew a guy, actually I knew two guys from Basque, they're from Spain, and they're like, we're not from Spain, man. Basque Country. I was like, all right, I want to go up there, check it out. Apparently really good food. Anyway, Ransom, back to you.
No, I was just thinking there at that idea because, the more I've thought about extraterrestrials coming to Earth, the more I think it's kind of, I don't think it's in the odds for a species from another star system to get here. However, that being said, what do? We send robots out. So if you're a technologically advanced civilization and you wanted to take over a planet, you could do some simple things that a lot of people, people don't think of. Like, you could just send a message. You could send a message with encoded DNA in it. Maybe you made a deal with the planet that you're going to, and if you had to merge. And then think about this. If aliens did show up, most likely they would show up via information, meaning that we could grow them in baby factories here. And I brought that up last time. You could grow, if this ever becomes a real fad, which the elite seem to be wanting to replace the parent. They want to replace the nation state. They use tribalism as a weapon, but in the end, they want to get rid of it. They want to get rid of it because they want a controlled civilization from the top down. So in order to do that, you'd have to have, like a uniparty or a culture. And you could do that easily by getting rid of cultural norms of parenting and family and loyalty to one's country and, all of those things. You could replace it. But as far as on the woo-woo end, if you were an alien civilization and you wanted to conquer a planet, you might make deals with them where you gave them small amounts of technology, enough to build an AI of your design. So, and then if you wanted to actually send representatives there, it's very possible, we know from our own technology, that we're reaching the point where you could take someone's consciousness and put it into something like an avatar, a machine, or a grown extraterrestrial body. Meaning that you could use the same technology that we use cloning for, the mRNA technology, all of that. You can use that for other things like growing what they recently called a human-like entity, which, because they made the embryo without a sperm or an egg, which means they can create life forms from scratch, basically. Now, if you were an extraterrestrial civilization and you wanted to take over a planet, well, you would have to have representation there, and you might not be able to get it there instantly or fast enough through traveling interstellar space, but you might send encoded information that's DNA to grow that. And think about this. We're talking about hybridization. If they wanted to conquer the planet, it would be as simple as changing a few DNA strands and growing a new type of human that is both us and them. And I know that you've heard this story before in ancient times, right? But on top of that, think about this. what would happen if they did show up or they were grown here, and then all of a sudden on the world stage we have this entity, this extraterrestrial? You might not be able to do things that offend it. You know, they would call you things like xenophobic if you didn't like the weird things or different anti-human behaviors that they might have. Like, what if they liked cannibalism? Or it wouldn't be cannibalism to them, right? Because they're a different species. And we just went over that before, that both us and other humanoids have done that. So I wouldn't think it would be that far-fetched for something else to be into that kind of behavior. And then think about this. What if it doesn't have a gender? What if it has no gender? Or what if it has 4 or 5 different specific genders? How would they fit into our civilization? Would you have to have a pre-program to get people used to the idea of new forms of life that you can't say things about? Maybe they don't like a binary system. Maybe to them, male and female family orientated structure is disgusting, gross, and backwards to them. You could think of many things that would be so different, because assuming they would be like humans is kind of far out there, unless we're dealing with the same entities that created us in the first place, in which it seems like there have been updates over time, and to where just people just show up, or new animals just show up. Now, you could go back away from the woo-woo and talk about cosmic rays, because, we know that has an effect on DNA as well. And if they did introduce a new species, they could say it's from anywhere. They really could. I mean, like in a lab, you could create a part amphibian, part reptilian, part whatever you wanted, a humanoid form that's intelligent, because they kind of lie to us about intelligence. And an example is a magpie. The magpie, according to scientists' definition of what makes a creature smart, should be, on average, smarter than a human being, because the formula they use for intelligence is brain-body ratio, right? So if you have a large brain for your body, generally you're really intelligent. So they put humans and dolphins at the top of this list, but they forget most of the ant kingdom, insects of different kinds, have a bigger brain-to-body ratio. And magpies, the birds, they're little bitty creatures, but yet they have a giant brain compared to their body, and they have shown all kinds of intelligence we didn't even know was possible. So if we don't even understand the life forms that live on our own planet, yet we're willing to tinker with DNA, there is no telling what the outcome of that will be and how they will present it to the people. But I can say one thing. I'm very untrusting. So it's more likely that something was created in a lab right here on Earth via information from extraterrestrial sources, or right here with tinkering with scientists that are just human. Either way, I wouldn't be trusting it. I would think that it came out of a lab. That's more plausible than aliens getting on a ship and flying over here, unless they're so far sophisticated that they can travel in between or just in between time space and just show up where they're at. And you would think that a species that advanced wouldn't even have a concern about us at all. And if they were going to take over the planet, they would just do something like hurtle a rock toward us.
Yeah, and all this would have to occur also in a altered atmospheric concentration of CO2 or other gases called terraforming. Because if you noticed, what you just referenced there with all of this manipulation and lab-grown humans, at the same time, our planet has been drastically altered in the last 30 years. It seems like the terraforming is matching or creating the conditions for these lab-grown, I don't even know if we could call them humans at that point, but lab-grown entities to exist in a different atmosphere or a different gas concentration of atmosphere as they're being created. So at the same time, we see 2 different types of things happening. And again, microplastics for us, detrimental. Maybe microplastics for this new type of species is something that is just as much needed as increased oxygen for our hemoglobin. It is an unknown because you're dealing with an unknown species. Perhaps they process hydrocarbons through their body and skin somehow to give them energy or respiration. There's like a million possible combinations of things of a newly created lab-grown entity on the way that they process the physical around them in the world. It doesn't matter what physical substance it is. Perhaps they thrive in irradiated environments. You know, because you talk about, we've had what 2,000 nuclear tests on our planet so far. So again, that is terraforming on the radiological side of things, bringing up the radiation levels incredibly. Because you got to think.
And one last week.
And one last week, plus one more. That'll bring us up to close to 2,100. So think about the terraforming needs to fit and plug right into your, lab-grown humans. And it seems that all this is moving lockstep under what? Under one global guidance measure, as stated by the Club of Rome. And again, you bring it back to, how long have these people that are in power really been around? Are they thousands of years old, or are they living the same lifespans we are, or are they have something also of a different type of species on this planet existing with our species? I guess I'll leave it there with you to sign us out for the night. But everybody, thank you for joining us tonight. Please sign up for our newsletter. Well, it's not even newsletter. It's just the show notes. Ransom and I take notes when we're talking, and we try to consolidate them in 10 bullet points of what we consider the most interesting things to talk about. It's a one-pager. Comes to you. Simple to read. It's good to start conversations with other people. You can sign up for that at oilseedcrops.org. Right up there in the nav bar, MIAC radio show. That's oil, like one barrel of oil. Seed, like one seed you plant. Crops that we harvest every year, plural. Oilseedcrops.org. Thank you for being with us tonight. It's an interesting week. Blessings and positive energy to everybody out there who needs to be changed.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
Imagine, if you will, a glimpse into the possible outcome of a million mistakes. What you are about to watch is a nightmare. It is not meant to be prophetic. It need not happen. It's the fervent and urgent prayer of all men of goodwill that it never shall happen. But in this place, in this moment, it does happen. In the midst of it comes unexpectedly over the phone the announcement of the President of the United States, the warning from the very top declaring a state of emergency of suspected enemy missiles approaching. It's anyone's guess where they might land. What city will be obliterated? How many could be lost? And last but not least, will it be me? Will it be my family, friends, my square inch on the map? Minutes go by and nothing. Right as you exhale a breath of relief, an instant wave of horror treks down your spine and a sinking feeling in the pits of your stomach. Just then the power goes out. The only light you see is the glow of your phone. Shining in your face, the icons of terror. Low battery, and even more frightening, the symbol for connection to information and loved ones gone. You try the landline in your office, desperate to contact family. Nothing at all, just a bone-chilling empty silence. Panic-stricken, you blindly forage for your car keys. Success. Something in this nightmare of a day has gone right. Now it's a desperate, mad dash for your car. Your mind now in a near-intellectual paralysis. Logic a struggle as you cope with a Gatling gun barrage of horrific ideas of what your family might be going through in this very moment. Miraculously, your car starts and you begin your seemingly apocalyptic drive to locate your kin. As you pass the first stop sign, the sight of civic decay is already bearing its nasty head as you speed past fights in the streets, looting and a complete halt of any semblance of an evolved civilization. To your right, a large fire. As angry, fear-filled citizens with their arms full of grocery items run from what used to be your local food market, ran by a mom and pop's couple, now collapses into a bonfire of dreams. Because of the commotion, your attention span has been stolen. Now before your automobile is a violent crowd. They have now surrounded your car, banging on the metal, bashing at the glass, screaming incoherently. What just a second ago was the road to salvation, now a deadly trap of circumstance and fear blocking your escape. This can't be happening, repeatedly echoing in your head as you start to mumble the phrase in a shrieking, inaudible, childlike tone to yourself. The trepidation now filling your lungs like a poison fog, suffocating and smothering in its certainty. Just then, as your heart and soul seem to be having synergistic perturbations, an alarm blares, overwhelming your senses. Immediately, you recall the warning of missiles. You close your eyes and expect the end. But the alarm morphs into a sweet, familiar beckoning of your alarm clock. You open your eyes and switch off the welcoming timepiece. A warm filling of relief as you realize your family is safe in their beds, and no pending doom is written in the stars today. For a split second, you ponder the poor people of your vision, and it reinforces your confidence that you have already prepared for the any scenario. You have peace of mind your children will eat and thrive, because you invested in their future to give some stability if any break in the normality of life happens. You invested in heaven's harvest. The you in this story was a fictional you. But do you get the feeling something unthinkable is going to happen soon? I sure do. The problem is we probably won't see it coming. One morning you'll wake up and the world will be a much different place. Don't panic, prepare. Smart folks are investing in emergency food now. A wise man once said, "It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it." Heaven's Harvest is the nation's leader in emergency food storage. It's the only investment you get 100% of your money for, even better than gold. Survival experts recommend the 3-month emergency food kit. Go to heavensharvest.com. Use the code ADAPT at